back, did people go for a walk, or some of us? I forgot to tell people there's this great little beautiful botanical garden greenhouse called Allen Gardens that's not very far away from here. I guess I kept it a secret so that I could walk in it by myself with my walking partner. But if you need a little bit of time away and you want to be with some nature and see some beautiful plants, and there's probably a dozen turtles in a turtle pond with a little water wheel, definitely, I will. I will. Definitely worth a visit. I want to check in with people about tonight for the community. Thinking you're pretty much everybody, which is good. Very good.
Reverse it. How many are not?
Oh, okay. How many are not coming? Like I said, most people are coming. Getting there is very easy for those of us who are willing to do some walking or wheeling. It's only about a 15-minute walk at the most, and in fact you're going to pass one of the best grocery stores that you could ever pass on the way there to pick up some food. You could take a cab if there was a bunch of you who wanted to get together. There's going to be a couple of people around who can probably help sort that out. How many people feel like they're going to need some help to get there? Because I'm telling you quite literally, you're going to walk to this street and you're going to walk up it until you hit 519 Church. That's how hard it's going to be to get there. It's very easy. If people need some support, who might need some support to get there, do you think? Garima is going to need someone. I'm sure, Garima, you will find someone who can help you to get there. If anyone else needs some help, try and seek out someone like myself or anyone else. I think these people at the back of the room can help people figure out how to get cabs or get some transportation. And then what to bring. I'm going to tell you some things that you probably don't need to bring because I looked at the little tags that people left, and we probably don't need any more nachos or salsa or chips. Probably not even any bread or cheese because it looks like those are pretty easy. I can promise you, if you walk into Loblaws on your way there, you will find some fantastic food that you want to share. It does not have to be very much because there is going to be a lot of food. That's what happens at these things. So if you think like that looks really good and I'd love to be able to share one serving with someone else, because really their plates aren't going to be that big and you're not going to be able to fit it all on there anyway. So bring something that just strikes your fancy, or something that you know is good, or something that you want to be good. And don't bring gazpacho, because that's what we're making. Right? That's the dish that we're going to provide for you. And the other thing we do need is actually some soft drinks or some fruit juice or something like that. That could be another thing, because we're not providing that. There'll be water there, but bringing that along would be great. Does anyone have any questions about that? All right. Well, if you do, seek me out. So we're starting at 6. We can't bring alcohol, unfortunately. But it's only till 8, and there will be plenty of people who will be finding places to have alcohol. Speaking of which, there is this room on the 11th floor across the way at the ILLC that those of you who may not have seen is called the Hospitality Suite. There's always a lot of hospitality going on there. Along with some music and some singing and some connection. There's coffee there in the morning for those of you who want to get a cup of coffee and don't want to have to run out and do that. We provide that. We welcome people to bring stuff to share. Those evening snacks for those late night munchies, which definitely happen. Please bring something to share. We'll probably bring some leftovers because I'm sure there will be some leftovers from dinner tonight. All that stuff will end up in hospitality. If you need a place to store something in a fridge, that's the place to do that as well. And now I get to introduce one of my favorite people in the whole world who I do not get to spend an awful lot of time with anymore, and was just reprimanded harshly this morning that I need to make more time for that to happen. So my friend Judith Snow has been talking about what it takes to figure out how to support each other, and I have learned an incredible amount. She is definitely one of my most incredible mentors. She and I owned a house together for about a year here in Toronto, and I learned a lot about what it takes to support each other and make that happen. And I'm incredibly grateful for having had that opportunity. So with that, I'm going to let Judith do what she does best.
Hello. How are you? I think so. They say it's good when you feel like you're eating it. Okay? So, a few of you may not know that I am Judith Snow. I am. Very often when I have arrived at the Toronto Summer Institute, I know what I want to do and I know what I want to talk about. This year I certainly don't know what I want to do. A little bit I do, but not really. And I only have a little bit of an idea of what I want to talk about. So I'll talk about that, and if I know anything about me, the rest of it will pop out somehow. And we'll be fine. I am an artist, and along the way to becoming an artist, I was for a very long time an advocate for inclusion. And I find that part of my life keeps creeping in anyway. It won't go away. I'm still an advocate for inclusion. But I'm an artist who's an advocate for inclusion now. And I was in an art exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum, one that was there for about 8 months, which was mainly about my art, but also about the process of how I do my art, which is called art facilitation. Anyway, I was in this art exhibit and somebody said, "So what's inclusion?" And I came up with, it's about celebrating diversity, basically. Even more than celebrating it, it's actually living our lives from diversity. So then last year, when I was in the Toronto Summer Institute, I had this amazing opportunity during last summer to work with a young man who's helping to make a video game that will give people the experience of celebrating diversity. Now, we haven't yet got the darn thing public, so I apologize for that. But I don't know about you, but last year was very chaotic. Have you noticed? A lot of things didn't go right. But we're still going, so at some point there will be a video game. Anyway, because of that video game, I had the experience of creating art for a video game. And the man, whose name is Ramin, said to me, this is very, 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 very important. I said, what? So, well, without art, there is no video game. You can do all the programming in the world, but there's nothing to see until there's the art. So art is making the invisible visible. And Diamond and I were sitting back there, and he says that I wasn't the first person, and Ramin wasn't the first person to come up with that. There's this poet somewhere about 20 years ago came up with that. So that's another phrase. I'm just giving you these phrases right now about inclusion and about art and about making the invisible visible. And the way all that comes together in my brain is around giftedness. Have you heard that word lately? Yeah? Well, Jack talked about it this morning, I think. Yes? Jack? Yes? Okay. Yeah, good. So we started, I was one of the people who started using the idea of giftedness in the 80s. And for me, my story of it is that I very much realized that the idea of disability doesn't work for me. You can call me a lot of things, but disabled really doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. How could you say I'm disabled? I'm running around the world, busy like nuts. I'm talking to hundreds of thousands of people, or at least it feels like that, right? I'm doing all these things. How could you say I'm disabled, right? But there's clearly something. So what is that, right? I was really, really, really struggling to figure out what that is. It was invisible to me for many, many, many years. And then this idea of gift. And okay, this is what I say about gift, okay? A gift is anything that you are, or that you have, or that you do, which creates an opportunity for some kind of interaction, some kind of relationship and interaction. So it can be something very simple. Typically, we talk about people being gifted when they create really strange interactions that people like a lot, like playing the piano really fast for long periods of time, right? People like it when you can do stuff like that, right? And they say you're gifted. But it still fits the definition, because when you can do something like that, you create opportunities for lots and lots and lots of other people to make music, to make recordings, to make concert halls, to sell tickets, to have, radio shows, all sorts of things. If there weren't these people that play really well, we wouldn't do those things. So a gift is about interaction and opportunity. So when I was a kid, I went to a school where Beverly Boyd also went to school. Now Beverly liked to park her body upside down in water many, many times a day. In other words, she was an Olympic diver. That was a compulsion for Beverly to put her body upside down in water over and over again, right? That's a very strange thing to do, don't you think? But people interpreted her strangeness as a gift. And they interacted with her and with each other in a very large number of ways, so that Beverly actually got to go to the Olympics 4 times. That's a lot of times for an athlete. And it would take you about 8 or 10 pages to write down all the different kinds of interactions that are made possible by people like Beverly. From people who build swimming pools, to making swimsuits, to the rules, to the government regulations, to the Olympics, the whole 9 yards. It's huge, right? Now, we treated Beverly in some different ways, and we treated Beverly in some same ways, right? She went to school. She was in the same classes as everybody else, but she would need tutoring because she was away so much. And she would need a few things shifted here and there. And of course, she got lots and lots of special attention. And she got up earlier, and people got up earlier with her, and all kinds of stuff that was done specially for Beverly, as well as stuff that was done in the same way for Beverly. It's all because she's gifted, right? So what about the kid in the same school who uses a motorized wheelchair? Do you get it? Yeah, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. As long as we do the same stuff and some different stuff, as long as we interpret it as a gift, as long as we allow for the variety of interactions that could come out of it and support those, as long as we celebrate it, as long as we're polite about it. We don't let people go up to Beverly and say, "You're weird." We're polite about her obsessive behavior, right? It's a gift. So why I really want to talk about that today is because I am frustrated by the extent to which we talk about the gift as if the gift is in Beverly or as if the gift is in Judith. It's not in Beverly. Beverly's the one who parks her body upside down in water, but the gift is not in Beverly. The gift is in how we interact with Beverly. The gift is in the relationship that we have with Beverly. If we choose to see Beverly as unacceptably weird, then we will still have interactions with Beverly, but they won't be gifted interactions. They will be disabling interactions. And that's the right use of the word disabled. It means to take away capacity, to take away ability. We will have interactions with Beverly that eliminate her capacity. If we have those kinds of interactions with her. But typically people are quite smart about the kind of weirdness that Beverly has. They realize that it's way better for everybody else if we celebrate her difference. And if we build economic opportunities and social opportunities around it. It's way better for everybody. It's better for Beverly, yes. And you hear lots and lots and lots of talk about that in inclusion conferences. But it's also, and much more importantly in my view, way better for everybody else. If we create the Olympics instead of creating an institution. Or create classic concerts, or create something that really works for everybody. Like I heard a story at lunchtime of a young man who wanted to climb the Himalayas. and he has a circle. And the circle started off, as many circles do, by thinking that climbing the Himalayas is actually what he wanted to do. So they got him about halfway up the Himalayas, right? Which is not bad, but that's hardly ever what people mean when they say things like, I'd like to climb the Himalayas. They usually mean something quite more connected to the. Anyway, I'll just tell the story and you figure it out. So somebody saw something in this guy and invited her nephew to one of the circle meetings. And her nephew has a band, and his band needed a roadie, somebody to schlep equipment and help move things around and enjoy and celebrate the fact that they have a band. And this guy got into being a roadie, and now he has really gifted stuff to do in the community, in the band. That's what inclusion is. That's what a gift is. It doesn't live inside the guy who thinks he wants to climb a mountain. It lives in the interactions that we have with the guy who thinks he wants to climb a mountain. Okay? And we are killing our communities because we will not have gifted interactions with certain people. I live in one of the most beautiful areas of the world. I live in South Etobicoke. It's part of Toronto. It's on the lake, basically. I live in one of the most multi-culturally diverse communities you can imagine. There are a great many young people in the age of like 14 to 28 or 29 whose parents were refugees, but they themselves have been living in Canada all of their lives. And they're multi-language, and they've got all kinds of cultural tradition at their beck and call, right? And they're very, very good at hanging together. Like, they're very good at building community. They can sit on the stoop of our co-op and drop into rap spontaneously, just out of nothing, right? These people are truly amazing. And we treat them, I mean our society, we treat them as if they were a hazard. We call them a safety risk. And 3 days ago, 50 of them were arrested at the same time and handcuffed and made to lie on their faces on the basketball court because somebody in the co-op is selling cocaine. It doesn't add up. So here we have this set of young people who understand multiculturalism, who understand community, who understand building an economy in a world where nobody will give them jobs, right? Who really support each other. They've got something we really want, and we treat them like they're a hazard to the world. That's not inclusion. That's not giftedness. And that creates a society where we are over-policed and where we're hugely at risk. Because, if any one of those cops had started shooting on Thursday, there would have been at least 10 dead people in that basketball court. Right? It's just... So, it's really up to us as citizens and I know this is what John will talk about in his module as well. It's really up to us as citizens to get that the conversation is not about disability. It just isn't about disability. It is about, will we choose to be with each other as if each other is a wonderful source of social and economic giftedness for each and every one of our communities. And if we take on that responsibility, we truly have a beautiful world to live in. Now, I myself don't have a specific session. Like, I'm not doing a thing on the board this year, but I'm going to put my name up in maybe 3 places. So if you just want to come and talk with me, I'm quite open to that. So that's where I'll be. Thank you. Talk to you later.
All models. Thank you, Judith. Now we're really going to have to think about that. It's really disruptive questions. Ironic that Judith talked about climbing the Himalayas. This is Michelle Amory, who intends to climb the Himalayas at some point. One day.
One of these days. Right now, my passion is rappelling off of buildings. So once I can climb up the building, yeah, I'll get there. But the rappelling coming down, that's the easy part. Anyways, here we go. Models. My name is Michelle Amory, and I am going to be doing silk painting with you guys Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday afternoons at any time. What was raised before about, John said it, about how we don't know how to accept the fact that we really are all creative in some way or another. We just don't know how to tap in on that. We don't know how to tap in on that because we're not listening to ourselves. So when we are able to just say, yeah, I think this is the color that's speaking to me, or this is the pattern that's speaking to me, these are the things that can come out of it. These are simple things. To be able to come and paint a scarf, it will take approximately an hour of your time. You can be beautiful in pink. You can be beautiful in blue. You can choose whatever you want to choose, but you don't necessarily have to wear it like a scarf. Tie around the neck. Oh, there we go. Tie around to hold your hair up. Use it as a belt, whatever. These are just ways of being able to show expression of creativity. Because I have been here for a number of years, and I've seen a number of people who have come and said, I can't do this, I'm not creative, I don't know how to be an artist. You know what? That is so bogus. I have seen it. I have witnessed year after year, absolutely everybody knows how to recognize what it is that is the creative artist in them and bring it out in a very short period of time.
Emily and I are trying to figure out other ways to wear the scarves, and we're doing like the same things.
The next time they're going to join it together. There's something that, based on things that Judith was saying, and the climbing and well, it just the questions made me think of a poem, and I'm trying to remember it now because it's a pretty powerful one, I thought. When I see the sea once more, will the sea have seen or not seen me? And why do the waves ask me the same questions I ask them? And why do they strike the rock with so much wasted passion? Do they ever get tired of declaring their declaration to the sand? Neruda, Book of Questions. Ask yourself your own questions. Figure out how to tap in on what you need to tap in on to find your creative spirit and pull it out. All you need is an hour to make a difference. I look forward to seeing many of you return, many new faces, and let's all just get wild and crazy.
Hey, thanks, Michelle. I want to invite John McKnight to come and share what you will do with the morning module this week. As John had described the schedule this morning, there will be morning modules on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and there will be 6 from which to choose. And our dear friend and colleague, John McKnight, is going to come talk with you about asset-based community development and what you'll be up to.
Afternoon. I'm so old that I've begun to forget stuff. So I have to use notes now to remind me. But my eyes are so bad that I can hardly read the notes. At any rate, it's interesting. Here we're about inclusion and community. In Vancouver, I think 2 years ago, the Vancouver Foundation commissioned a study of what people in Vancouver thought were the most significant problems from their own perspective. They did a sample of all the people in Vancouver, and they offered them a lot of choices as to what might be the most significant issue affecting them. Was it the price of housing? Was it crime? Was it lack of employment? That kind of a list. And when they were done, none of those things were chosen. Instead, the most frequent response to what is the biggest problem for you in Vancouver was loneliness. Isn't that something? Loneliness. Not crime, not jobs. Loneliness. And then last year, there was a study made in the United States, how many people live alone? And compared to 1985, in the United States, twice as many people live alone as they did just those short few years ago. Then there was a Harvard academic who did some studies having to do with how are people associating together. How many groups, clubs, and organizations do they belong to? How often do they have dinner with other people in the neighborhood at their houses? Do they give money to be helpful to the community or others? Those kind of questions. Right? And what he found was he could trace from 1900, and so people were more and more involved in relationships are associative in community. Every year, more and more people were involved in more and more associations until 1969. And in 1969, it flattened out. And by 1973, the relationships people have, this is in the United States, began to go down and down and down. And it's gone down every year. So the wonderful thing about being here is that this effort started 28 years ago. And it was focused on this question. How do we include people? How do we overcome loneliness, isolation, failure to have relationships, which just now people are beginning to see as a big problem? So what's really wonderful here is we're ahead of the game. We've been at this for 28 years trying to figure out what do we do about these disastrous trends. And there's a ever-growing field of knowledge that is here in the experience of everybody who's here. And so this is a gathering. This is the postgraduate seminar on what do we do about the collapse of relationships in Canada and the United States at the local level. So because I've been at 27 of these 28 gatherings, one of the things we'll be doing is sharing at least what I've learned over that period of time about several questions. Why is it that so many people have become isolated? It'd be interesting if we could all just write down the word. Why is this happening? And the second is, how do people get isolated? And the third is, how do people get connected? And the fourth is, what is it that happens when people get connected? Those are the four kind of questions we'll be examining in this module. And we'll also be exploring what is the difference between an inclusion initiative that is based in an agency as against based in a citizen organization in community. What's the difference? What are the plus and minuses of those two approaches? Another thing we'll be discussing is what is the language of inclusion, right? I was in a university for a good many years, but I was also involved in neighborhood organizing and research and had been a neighborhood organizer. So I would go out of the neighborhood and I would go into the university and I'd go back in the neighborhood, and what you could see immediately is there were two languages, completely different, right? In the university, people knew things by studies, and that's what they talked about. And in the neighborhood, people knew things by stories, and that's what they talked about. So the language of inclusion is very important. How do we think and talk about a world of connectedness? And what kind of language gets in the way, leads us astray? And then, what is an includer like? If we're for inclusion, what is the including activity, the includer like? Now that all is a little mechanistic in its definition, but the overarching, I think, word is hospitality, right? what we'll be looking at is the nature of hospitality, the nature of welcoming, the nature of neighboring, right? My mother, we lived when I was a kid in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a pretty working class neighborhood, inner city neighborhood. And it was a depression, right? Time I'm thinking about, 1/3 of the people in the United States were unemployed. And my mother was an Irish woman. My wife used to call her Mrs. Clean. And next door to us came from the hills of Kentucky some people, a family. My mother didn't look on them well. They had dirty clothes. They didn't speak correct English. They looked peakedy and unhealthful. And she didn't think it was a good idea for her children, me, to play with the kids next door. One day, Mr. Thal, the father in the family next door, lost his job. And when you lost your job in the Depression, nobody would say, well, I'll find another one next week. Because over 1/3 of the people around us didn't have jobs. And so my mother, when she found out Mr. Thal had lost his job, went next door and said to Mrs. Thal, listen, I know it's going to be hard for you. I'll cook dinner for you until he gets a job again. They had 4 children. I mean, they were a family of 4, we were a family of 5. And my father had a job, not a good job, but we had enough money to buy dinner. And so for 3 years, she cooked a dinner for 9 people. Right? And when I was about 30, I remembered this, and I said to her, Mom, why did you do that? You didn't like the Thals. Why did you do that? And she said, just as though it was perfectly apparent, well, John, they were our neighbors. John, they were our neighbors. Now, my mother was speaking about relationships and care that didn't come from a program. It came from the culture in which she resided. And the culture said, when your neighbor doesn't eat, you feed him. And incidentally, I now know from doing some other reading, my mother was not unusual. Nobody died in the streets of hunger during the Depression, as bad as it was, because friends and neighbors did what was necessary for people to survive, because they cared about neighbors. So the last thing I'd like to examine in our module is, if we're really interested in relationships of care, the question, I think, is a cultural question. Something was, nobody ever taught my mother that you feed your neighbor, but the culture said it to everyone, right? So what might we do if we said, maybe we could have a culture of care in our neighborhood. Maybe we could be people who are deeply responsible to each other. How could that begin to be our way, right? Now, I do know from a lot of research that we've done that most people who are over 50 or 60, when you ask them, tell me about how things were on your block as you were a child, they tell story after story of how the neighbors took responsibility for them, for their safety, for their behavior, for their learning. I can count on it. I'll get that story. But as I go down the age group, 50, 40, 30, everybody here is under 30, I don't get the story very much. I don't hear about a block like that, right? So the amazing thing to me is that in 2 generations, we lost the culture of care. Just 2 generations. And yet there are a whole lot of people who know about that. I'd call them our elders. Who recognizes that is the Native Americans, right? So what we're going to explore is, can we recover the knowledge that was everywhere and is in every experience of our elders? So that's what I think we're going to try to examine in this module. Now we have 3 hours, and I've recruited a colleague. I'll do the first 2 hours, and I've recruited a colleague to lead us through the 3rd hour, because he is one of the great adventurers moving out of the box, looking at ways to see the culture that is there and to expand the culture even more. So I can't see that well. Diamond, where are you? There. Please, Diamond Hargis, one of the great artists of this age.
Sawubona. You respond, Sekona. In South Africa, and spending some time in Guguletu, that's how they would greet each other. Sawubona means I see you. Sakona means it is good to be seen. And kind of in my adventures, that everybody is waiting to be listened to or seen or heard. So what we're going to explore is in ways that we may do this in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patty Scott, and this is Dave Hasbury. And I got to tell you, the module that Diamond and John just described sounds really, really good. Yeah, I was really blown away. Yeah, that's what I'm leading into. No, we are actually looking forward to doing ours. For those of you who don't know us, we just want to tell you a tiny bit about where we're from and what we do. We're from New Jersey, and a lot of what we're engaged in is working with an organization there called Neighbors Inc., which I started back in 1995. And for the past 19 years, we've been working side by side in partnership with people and their families and the people who love them to really look at developing a life. And what struck me when I was listening to Connie talk this morning, was those are really the things that we've been struggling with people with for the past 19 years, to kind of figure out how that can look for them in the communities in which they live. And doing that within a system that doesn't really welcome it, and is not designed for that to happen. And so we do that in partnership with people in New Jersey and with some people in Pennsylvania within that organization. And then we also are lucky enough to have a second organization, Neighbors International, and it enables us to work in some other places like Croatia and Romania and Ohio and different places like that. I know. Different places like that where we get to explore the same types of things with people who are struggling with the same issues in those places, sometimes really different places. And as we've been doing this, one of the things that that keeps hitting us and striking us is that you've got people like us who start out with these very simple values, and the things that we want to do, the heart of the work that we want to do is really quite simple. It's about life, like all of us lead it. Now, I'm not saying it's not hard work, but it's simple stuff. And we're working often in organizations and systems that move so far away from simple that all of a sudden things become very convoluted and complex. And quite often we find not only are the systems and the organizations becoming the barrier, but we start to become a barrier ourselves because we start operating in response to the systems and organizations. And instead of focusing on what's at the heart of what we believe and what we care about and what we feel, we find ourselves responding to this rule or this regulation or turning ourselves backwards and upside down to try and fit into a system that all of a sudden has us maybe providing services in the way the system wants us to, but not helping people have a life. So what we were interested in exploring over these 3 days is this whole idea of getting to simple. Things have gotten so complicated and have gotten so out of control in so many ways. How do we get back to those simple ideas at the heart of what we believe in? And how do we do that both individually and within the organizations and the systems in which we work? And there's a couple of things we want to share. We have a couple of frameworks that we've been playing with and exploring that have helped us a bit. Certainly from neighbors, we've learned a lot, almost always when something has gone incredibly wrong, about how we can get closer to the whole idea of simple. But mostly what we're interested in is spending time with people who share the same passion for this particular question about how we get back to those simple values that we believe in and what we can do about that. So I'm going to let Dave add to this a bit.
So Patty actually started the organization Neighbors, and I kind of do this other stuff with her, Neighbors International. But one of the things about Patty and her work is that she's actually thought of how an organization can think and organize itself to have outcomes that fit with what's important. And one of the things that we're always trying to deal with is there has to be ways for us to organize ourselves so that we can be paying attention to things that are important more often. So some of it is, how do we structurally do that? How do we actually set ourselves up? And examples of that are just, the Summer Institute is an example of a way of organizing ourselves that allows certain things to happen. But organizations can do that. They can decide how we organize ourselves so that we pay more attention to these things. And the other part is, and you remember John McKnight in the early days of the Summer Institute introducing us to a book called Habits of the Heart, which the whole idea of habits, because one of the things is we get into habits that are really bad habits. The things that many of the funding mechanisms and service systems and all that, they're actually awful habits. In fact, they're so bad that they hurt people. So how do we actually establish habits? I'll just stand here to make sure that it doesn't come down. because it's not coming over me. So how do we actually establish a way of being together so that our habits are about what's important? And also, the big thing is that living in a world, really the whole idea of inclusion is that the world has been designed to have people not be a part of it. It didn't happen by accident. It actually was designed that way. So if we're going to do something, it really requires creativity. It requires us to redesign. And how do we actually do that? How do we actually approach the world as creatively? So how do we establish habits and structures that promote focusing on what's important and focusing on being creative? And how do we get to the simple things that John and Diamond are actually talking about in their little gathering? So is that okay with you? Good.
Hello, I'm Emma Vanderclift, and this is Norman Kuntz. And we're kind of unexpectedly doing a module, which we are delighted to do. Listening to John talk about Vancouver, we're from Vancouver, by the way, and it was very interesting given that Vancouver is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in, and still the issue was not affordability, it was loneliness. That was really something to hear. How many of you were here last year? So some of you, quite a few of you. And so you probably heard Norm do a presentation at the end of one of the days on something called narrative practices. And what we are going to do in our module is explain that a little better and expand on that. We're going to really look at relational processes between us, much in the same way that Judith talked about earlier. And we are going to think about the narratives, not the narrative of just telling your story. That's what we tend to think a narrative is, it's just telling your story, but the larger narratives in which we are all marinated. And there are some very specific narratives about disability that we want to have a look at. And we want to think about how those influence what it is that we do. We want to look specifically on the first day at narratives and metaphors that exist right now around specifically autism and what the consequences of living with those narratives actually are for people and the power relationships that they set up. And we want to have a look at that and unpack that a little bit and think about how we might do things differently. I have been spending a lot of time, both virtually and in person, in the neurodiversity movement with autistic activists and self-advocates over the last year and more. And we're going to bring you a lot of insider voices in the form of video, in the form of written stuff. So it's going to be kind of a mixed media presentation. You'll have a lot of interesting stuff to look at and think about. And we'll do a little talking together, and we'll do a little talking. So that's basically where we're coming from. And then we're going to diverge, and we're going to think about innovation and also help. So why don't you take it from here?
All right. Then I guess on the second day, we're going to take this whole idea of narratives and apply it to the whole idea of innovation. Now, innovation is a word like diversity. Everyone says it and nods, and isn't that sweet? But I spent many, probably most of my life thinking how to be innovative. Because when you have a disability and there's something you can't do, you either don't do it or think of a way to do it. So you get very good at practicing to be innovative. And what I've learned is it's not about creativity. It's not about this magical gift. It's just a skill that if you practice it, it gets easier and easier. So we're going to be looking at the second day on narratives of innovation that in fact liberate you to be innovative. Again, we're going to be watching some very humorous, very wonderful videos of different people who were innovative. Finally, the last day we're going to be looking at narratives of help. And the specific question we want to look at is in this society, especially in human services, there is a pervasive narrative in which we are all marinated in, which could be called benevolence, being nice to people with disabilities. Our question is, how do we change that narrative so we go on beyond benevolence to an idea of authentic reciprocal support? And again, we're going to be using a lot of videos, some from the disability field, but we're actually going to be using some videos from the field of people working with people in poverty in Guatemala, showing how these people, so-called white Westerners, white privileged people who went down to help these poor people, changed their narrative of what help was, and how once that narrative changed, their ability to provide meaningful support changed. So that's an overview of the 3 days we'll be doing.
I just want to add a last little thing about that. For both Norm and I, the whole idea of cross-pollination has become increasingly important. And we have really thought with John and with Peter Block that when we only have conversations with each other, we continue to have the same conversations. And so what we'd like to do is bring new conversations and new voices into what we're doing and begin to think about that.
And if you're really
by the way, we're married. Can you tell already? Sneak preview.
And if you really like to encourage her, Emma may talk about her work with hostage negotiators and how that informed our work on working with disabled people. So
that's what you call a hook in the business. Okay.
That sounds great. All right. I'm bailing on mine too. There's no way I'm going to be someplace else with all that happening. So the one I'm going to do is, we're calling it conscious care and support. How many of you here drive a car? Give me a show of hands. Most people. Some pretty serious, frightening research that says that 80% of the time you're behind your wheel, you're not driving the car. You know, you kind of put the key in the ignition and you end up in the parking lot. How many does that happen to? Remember that? Yeah, okay. Who's driving the car when your mind is someplace else? Who's offering support when your mind is someplace else? One of the pieces we're going to do is to, with conscious care and support, I talk about helping to immunize support workers against the 4 outs: burnout, freak out, tune out, and space out. Those are the 4 that we've dedicated this particular program to. We're going to touch through the 3 days on 5 human competencies that we suggest is required. See, a lot of us have been trained in the direct support field, even advocacy and activism, to what to do, how to do it, why to do it, when to do it, policies, procedures. Very little time is spent on who is doing it. So what we're going to bring is how to enhance the who. How to bring a who that's more complete in terms of being present when you're there, but also a who that does not get hooked on your own little girl, little boy stuff. A who that can self-regulate more so. And a who that, because of what you bring to these moments, brings an unconditional compassion, not benevolence the way Norm was talking about at all, an unconditional compassion regardless of how you're feeling. We're going to talk about feelings being these primordial instincts that have come out of evolution. That's all they are. Help us to get closer to the good guys and away from the bad guys, right? That's what feelings are about. Nothing to do with unconditional, authentic connecting. So the services, so the human services competencies we're going to teach is going to bring us closer to being able to be that way. And then on the first day, we're going to start tomorrow, very specifically looking at the field of autism and developmental disabilities. And I mentioned this morning I've got some great connections with Harvard, and I'm just going to bring just be a conduit to really bring you some of what they're suggesting. Their research over the last few years has showed is some optimal ways to much better understand particular behaviors. You're going to hear me put ABA and a little piece on the continuum, but not the whole continuum as it is in many jurisdictions today. And we're going to look at understanding the behaviors and how not to manage them, even prevent them from a behavior perspective, but go way back upstream. Harvard's got a very clear formula as to where behaviors come from. We start with unmet human need, which will always bring every person to anxiety. From anxiety, unless we get that dealt with immediately, it'll go into agitation, anger, and aggression, and then to calm. That's how the human nervous system works to get back to calm. So we're just going to show you some of I've got 9 tools that we're going to just talk about in that one day to help bring to that, okay? So that's where we're going to go, and for those who'd like to join us, love to see you, okay?
So Linda and I are going to hang out in one of the rooms, and be nice if some of you join us. And what we're worried about, and therefore going to work on, for me anyway, is that our language has been colonized. And so many of the words and concepts that we're feeling here in a deep way are being minimized and trivialized, and it's very dangerous. It puts people in danger of extinction. So there's a pretty dark side underneath. But lecturing about the dark side doesn't seem to get many people's attention, so we're not going to do that. I just want you to notice that we have that underlying concern. And if we could tell you, as many people have done for a few decades, the right answer, as if we had one, of course, if we were perfectly logical, which we aren't, we'd have done it. The problems would be fixed and we wouldn't be here. But that ain't so. So we're figuring out, with many people's guidance, but I sort of think about Beth Mount, if you don't got your fingers in it, it's not going to happen. So I loved the sketch exercise this morning where you sat and just fiddled
and made something happen, and it's a whole different kind of communication. So we invite you to come and play. It's some will be fun play, some will be serious play, but one of the elements of the play is we're going to play with colors and markers and graphs. So if that terrifies you, please come. So we'll be making lots of marks on lots of paper, not because it's cute, but because we need to reach beyond the words. We need to reach out into imagery. We need to reach out into other elements of our being in order to have the kind of communication we need to make the kind of difference we're all talking about. So we need to engage with more than words, and we need to have ways to reclaim the words and the values that we've been working on for so long and that are, quite frankly, being prostituted. And we need to reclaim them. But we need a language and an image and a sound and a smell, whatever, to reclaim the deep meaning of this work that we do so that we can include each other, be included, and create the world that we want and not the one we're being sold into.
So we'll be engaged in values-based visioning and exploring, really deepening our facilitation practice through work with graphics and visioning and using imagery and being able to really listen to one another in some exercises that really help us explore the kinds of things that are really in between the lines of various practices that people talk about in person-centered or person-directed planning. People often talk about the steps that there will be. We want to talk about what's in between the lines, the ways that we listen, the ways that we hold the space for one another. And so we'll be listening for highest purpose and engaged in very practical kinds of exercises and explorations, very much rooted in the 5 valued experiences that Connie O'Brien talked about this morning. And we'll be doing that with stories and multimedia and music and nonsense. And so we'll look forward to those who join us.
This is the last module. You can give thanks now. It didn't take me long to get that there was something profoundly wrong about the relationship between people with disabilities, the ways in which we respond to people with disabilities, both socially and in terms of how we organize support around them. It took, I think, less than a minute, because your sense of smell is one of the most powerful ways of orientation to the world, and the place that I walked in to work smelled infernal. And so it didn't take me long to get the idea that things needed to be different. And lots of people have banded together and passed laws and created enormous reform agendas. And whereas we may not have as much money as we like, we've got quite a lot. The province of Ontario has said that in response to unmet need, it's going to spend up to $800 million in the next couple of years. And the conversation that I want to have is about what makes it likely that that $800 million is going to end up creating a lot more of the same and a little bit different. Does that make sense? That's what I keep seeing. And it isn't because we don't invest in quote-unquote systems change efforts, right? We put money into lots of things to to make the shift, to make the change. And Connie and our friend Beth Mount and I, along with Jack and Linda and lots of other people from around the world, have been struggling with this question of how do we make our odds better that those big investments are actually going to result in organizations that can learn. So we've got a couple of themes, and we're writing a book about this. We have failed so many times in so many interesting ways, right? We've had so many good ideas about, hey, this will do it. And we've looked at a lot of other people's great ideas about how it's going to look. And we've had some real success, but we've also failed in a lot of interesting ways. And we're writing this book to make sense out of it. We don't know whether anybody else in the world will read it, but that's not really the point. A big part of what we're trying to do is just make sense of what might switch the odds, right? What might change the odds that $800 million will result in something new and different rather than more of the same with a little bit different language wrapped around it. And the theory that I'm working on is that citizens are actually responsible for what happens with their tax money. That there's a lot of great stuff that citizens are responsible for, being good neighbors and creating a culture of care, and all those things seem to me actually to be more important than what I want to think about and talk about. But I think it's also important to figure out, in the United States, just in one funding stream alone, we spend $68 billion a year. That's almost as much money as we spend on soft drinks. Almost as much, right? But $68 billion is quite a lot. So how can we spend all that money and have so few astonishing and wonderful stories to hear about the meaning of inclusion? That's what I'm curious about. So we want to kind of trace out a little bit and trace out what's the story of person-centered planning and why it's worked so poorly as a mechanism for making change, and when it works well and what the difference is. And I'd like to think about what kind of an ecology we have to create in order for self-direction and individual funding to actually be meaningful to large numbers of people. And I think we know very little about those things, but I know a lot about how to fail at creating larger scale change. And I think there's some worthwhile lessons in it. So I know that doesn't sound like this is the dessert course of the modules. This probably sounds a little bit more like serve a large serving of broccoli. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that there might be a small handful of us who would be willing to kind of explore some of this together. And my plan is to sort of use you unscrupulously and mercilessly to test some of these ideas that we're messing around with. I want to say, you know, here's what we think, and you can tell us what's utter crap and what might be okay to keep going with. We're at the stage of our thinking where it would help a lot for people with excellent crap detectors to show up. So the basic idea we've got is that this is a time in which we require moral leadership. Not necessarily, that's not about authority, right? Moral leadership, at least the way I understand it, is fallible people, right? Fallible people trying to bring meaningful values into reality in an uncertain and unwelcoming environment. So somehow or other, one little piece of moral leadership is having some resources for sense making, for figuring out, you know, what's a good idea to do more of, and what are some things that probably aren't going to work any better this time than they have the last 10 or 12. Right? So that's what I'm looking forward for. So if you have an appetite for broccoli, please come.
We want to give people an opportunity for a stretch bake and to get some cold water, and we're only going to take 15 minutes. And Jackman, when we come back, right, do you want people, would you like to tell them what you'd like them to do when we come back from the break? Where would you like them to go?
Second choice. Oh, very tempting, isn't it? But I'll be nice. When we come back, in about an hour, or if we're really good, we are going to figure out our agenda for the next 3 days. So, in short order, we need to clear out a fair space in front of that so that we can have sort of the pit, as in a rock show, and people will gather fairly closely. And just so you know what will happen is we'll explain the rules of engagement, but there are going to be a lot of nice little post-it notes. And these are where you will write clearly, intelligibly, headlines of a topic. So just a burst, just a headline in dark, readable colors. And what we're going to do then is encourage you to create topics you are passionate about, you have an inquiry about, stuff, the issues you want to explore, and we'll figure out how that goes up on the board. So you have a nice 15-minute break, water, visit the outside, but clear a nice big area there. And what will happen, we'll walk you through, you will name your items, we'll post them, and you will present them. And then we vote with our feet. Okay, 15 minutes. Enjoy. Whoa, Kathy, we have lost a purse. We're looking. A black purse with a long strap is missing. Look around you in this room.